Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you again for those of you that have accepted the panelist invitation. And at any point when we ask you questions, if you'd like to participate, you can just raise your hand and we can invite you then to be a panelist, or you can raise your hand and we can allow your mic to participate in that way. And really, we want to invite you to use the chat as much as possible so that this is a two-way Zoom experience. And with that, actually, maybe I'll just invite you to find the chat now. And if you can put to all participants, to everyone, and let's just go in and put in one word to describe how you're feeling right now. Would you mind doing that for us? What is one word to describe how you're doing right now? As you find the chat and do that, Carrie, I see that you have raised your hand. Do you have a question? Was it just like a welcome high five? Well, then high five to you too, Carrie. Thank you so much. And folks, as you see the words coming in, what I love about this prompt is that you get to see the full spectrum of the human experience. We're happy and we're silly and we're frustrated and disappointed and curious and anxious, and that makes sense. That makes sense. I'm going to ask one more question. If you were to rate yourself right now on a scale between 1 and 5, where 5 is really exhausted and 1 is like super sprightly and full of energy, where are you? How tired are you right now? 1 is very energetic, 5 is really tired. Okay. 4.77. I like you, Carrie. Okay. Thank you again so much for this. Appreciate knowing what's here now. I'm gonna start by sharing my screen. And as we move into this phase of our time together, even though some of us here may be 5 out of 5 tired, and whatever it is that we're feeling and transitioning from, I think it's really important to take a moment to slow down and honor the subject matter here, because this is such an important, close to home topic, definitely for Yuri and I. But it's full of lots of feelings and requires a lot of tenderness. So wherever you're at, whatever you're doing, if you have like 7 tabs open or 47 tabs open, could I just for a moment invite you to put that down? Maybe you might close your eyes. Maybe you just want to look at something out your window. But just take a moment to acknowledge that you are sitting in a webinar on recognizing and managing unconscious bias. And maybe you're here because you realize you're chock full of biases and it's time to do better. Maybe you're here because you're on the receiving end of them over and over and it's tiring. Maybe you're just curious. But isn't it something that we're all here now? Okay, let's do it. Yuri, over to you.
And when you took that moment to breathe, I panicked. Thought my computer bandwidth. I'm stressed out. Hello, everyone. My name is Yuri Cho, and I was workshop. I thought, what does this have to do with me, and what could I? And I thought, what could I do? 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 And I thought, what co it's so meaningful to me.
Yuri, I'm going to interrupt because
and I did tell Ellen, I cried.
Yuri, you're coming in really choppy. You're coming in choppy. You sound a little bit like a robot. And it sounds like in the chat people agree.
Is it still choppy?
It's medium.
It is still choppy.
Thanks for your patience, everyone. Want to try saying something now?
I know, it is choppy. Is it okay?
Not great. Can I make a suggestion and maybe you log out and come back in and see if that changes it? And in the meantime, I'm going to tell your story for you. Okay, great. Let's see if that works. So there's a longer backstory that's not necessary for us to take you through right now, but Yuri came in as a last minute change to our speaker, and Yuri has been through a set of her own health inequity experiences, and for years she had complained to her physician about this pain in her back, and year after year in the check-ins, the doctor would tell her, it's just stress, it's just stress. And she never really looked further into it. And finally, a friend of hers is a physician and said, you might need to just advocate for yourself a little bit more aggressively. And so she did. And in doing so, they ended up taking an x-ray and they found a very large tumor on the back of her neck, just very close to her spine. And they actually kept her in the hospital. And within days, she had had a major operation because it was so severe and quite life-threatening. And this was important for us to share with you because there are a number of empirical accounts where we see that people of color, women more than men, they get dismissed in a way that's sort of disproportionate. And if I take you to this slide, I mean, I have no words to describe what it would be like to die in the hospital begging for care when you have 7 children. And this is what happened to Joyce. And I just think it's so important to have a face to these statistics because the gravity of what we're talking about here is enormous. And whether it's Joyce or other statistics, I hear these stories quite a bit. And over the last sort of year and a half, we've been examining stories of healthcare inequity from other participants. And it's a thing. It's also a thing in the workplace. You could go as far back as children in schools. So Black boys in particular get harsher, more severe punishments for less appropriate behaviors. You see more punitive punishments in the criminal system for people of color, and you see it in the workplace. I suppose that's just us trying to make a case for how salient these issues remain. And now, as we explore these ideas further, I thought it might be nice to have a set of ground rules that just ruled how we engage with each other here. So psychological safety is this idea that you won't be punished if you say the wrong thing or challenge an idea. And I would love to make that welcome here. So if you disagree with something or you want to speak up and challenge ideas, please feel free to do so. You can do so in the chat or you can raise your hand and speak up, because the whole premise of advancing these ideas of EDI requires us to be willing to listen and be uncomfortable. And a climate of authenticity is this idea that you can share distress in the group and that that's okay. You don't have to be perfect and stoic all the time. We can be messy and human together. And that's also what I would like us to consider. And then I know that this is a webinar and probably of many other priorities, but I think we'll all get more out of it if we can be more present. The topics we talk about may bring up feelings. Both Yuri and I have cried multiple times when we talk about these ideas, when we put together different slides, and that's okay. In fact, it's an essential part of this work. And then the last one is, can we just be curious? Every time we want to be judgmental or default into habit, can we instead meet that moment with more curiosity? Okay, Yuri, hopefully your mic is going again.
Let's see, is it working?
That's great.
Okay, so should I explain why this is meaningful to me, or do we just jump into the Mad Libs?
Let's go straight to the Mad Libs just for time. Thanks.
All right, I'm going to ask everyone to grab a pen. I'm going to show you a Mad Libs, just like the Mad Libs that we had when we were kids, or maybe actually like the host of this workshop, she's only 23, so maybe I don't even know, you guys know what Mad Libs are anymore. I'm going to show you a paragraph. There will be blanks, and you have 1 minute to quickly make the paragraph make sense by filling in the blanks. And you're just going to write the first word that comes to you. Don't overthink it. Unlike the Mad Libs, there will be no noun or verb prompt. Just read the paragraph and fill it in with the word that makes sense to you. All employees are capable of, but we cannot expect all staff to, when far too many are, responsibilities at home and at work, tripping and falling as they to deliver. So you have 1 minute to fill in those blanks on a sheet of paper. We are going to put you into breakout rooms, and there you will have 3 minutes to read your paragraphs to each other. And because we think that maybe you won't want to participate or you'll be hesitant or shy, the person who woke up the earliest this morning will have to go first. So in your breakout rooms, the person who woke up earliest will go first. You'll take turns reading your paragraphs, and then we'll come back and discuss what we wrote.
We've been pulled back. So welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you managed to find the handout to guide you through that exercise, and hopefully you were able to share along the way. Yuri, I'm going to take us back to the slide itself and share with you what the paragraph originally looked like.
The original paragraph was, all employees are capable of commitment, but we cannot expect all staff to engage when far too many are prioritizing responsibilities at home and at work, tripping and falling as they continue to deliver. And this activity is designed to just show you how much language impacts the meaning, and based on where you are, how stressed you are, how pressured you feel at work or at home, the first word that pops into your mind, even though you feel like it's so true, could be so different from a colleague at work or from a patient at work or someone you're dealing with. And the words that we choose indicate our unconscious beliefs, and that people have different points of view on different points of things based on how they are. And what you feel is so factual could actually be opinion. And sometimes that's hard for us to own, that what we hold so true is actually maybe not actually that true at all for other people based on who they are and where they come from and their experiences. And for me, when I was talking about this paragraph with Ellen, it really rattled me because when I read this, I'd like you to just close your eyes and who are you picturing when I say that? When I say, all employees are capable of commitment, but we cannot expect all staff to engage when far too many are prioritizing responsibilities at home and at work, tripping and falling as they continue to deliver. What does that person look like to you? Does anyone want to throw that out onto the chat? When you close your eyes and you picture it, a manager who's not in touch with their own feelings. Okay. Anybody else? Thank you, Ruth. For me, when I close my eyes and I picture that, my implicit bias is that it was a woman, that she's working hard at work and she's prioritizing her responsibilities at home. Because in my world, that's who takes care of the home. And then I had to kind of check myself because not everyone lives in a home with a man and a woman at home. So I'm the person at reference. Yeah, Kira, me too. Me too. That's what it feels like. And so for me, when I read that, I can only actually picture a woman. And then I have to check myself because that's not a truth. That's not fact. There are also men who also feel this way. And that was the exercise for that. I pictured a woman. Our staff is 95% women. Yeah. So when your staff is 95% women, and that's what you're picturing, you have to kind of own that that's your bias, that's your implicit bias, that's what you're going to think, and then recognize that it's not always going to be women, and you need to think about the other perspective in that case. Ellen?
Kathy, your comment actually pulls really well on sort of the foundational definition of bias, in that it's influenced by our social context, happens from a very young age. So they've shown that even as young as 3, bias emerges. And the Disney franchise, brilliant capitalists that they are, when I watch my daughter color in images, she always draws the person blonde. When we play dolls, she always grabs Elsa first. We have a Mulan doll, but it's always on the shelf. And the messaging we receive is incredibly dominant. I screenshotted this today because I was curious, if I go on Netflix and look at the top 10 shows, what kind of representation do we have here? And other than cartoons, I'm looking at not a lot of diversity. And also, hey, new season of Bridgerton is out. How about that?
Ellen, I was laughing really loud at your Bridgerton comments. And when I looked at that slide deck and I saw that picture of the princesses, it really resonated with me. This is a photo of Gus. I'm Korean. Sam, my husband, is many generations Canadian. For Gus, growing up, whenever we would say, oh, you're really like me, or you're really like dad, he would always say, I'm like dad. I'm like dad. The very first slide, we showed a picture of Sam. He is super white. He had blonde hair. Now he's got white hair. He has piercing blue eyes. His skin is so white. Gus and I, to me, are twins. But every time he drew himself, he would pick a peach colored crayon. And then he would say, do I have dirty skin? And that like really broke my heart. I told Ellen I was going to cry, but that's okay because I'm leaning in. When Shang-Chi came out, Gus was 5. And I said, I'm going to take him. It doesn't matter actually how violent or what the swear words are. We were super anti-screen, but I said, I'm going to take Gus. So we took Gus and my older daughter and we went to see Shang-Chi. And when we came out, honestly, like from that moment on, Gus was half Korean. His drawings changed. he talks about summer skin because when we are in the sun, our skin gets so dark. And depending on the month of the school year, when he does his portraits, you can see he's got dark brown skin and it like gets lighter and lighter, but never peach again. And he takes great pride in saying that he's Korean, asking about the Korean language. But it really took Shang-Chi for Gus to see, oh, there could be a representation of a man in power, a man in the movies, a superhero who looks like me. But until that point, the only person that he saw that was in any kind of position of power or cool or strength, they were white men. And for him, then that's what he latched onto. Even though if he looked in the mirror, it wasn't what he saw, that was his identity for him. And, you know, with the arrival, oh, Ellen's pushing me along. So it's important that you show and you represent different ideas and different visual representations of power.
Thanks, Yuri. Part of the intention of our workshop is to help give you practical ways to start dismantling the biases and the automaticity that just naturally occurs in our own neural function. So one model of the brain is sort of the triune brain, which says that our brains developed in 3 chapters. Part 1 was this reptilian system. So it's your brain stem, your limbic system. Then we had our limbic brain, which is actually more of your emotional centers. And then the last part that evolved was your neocortex. So all of your executive function happens here, your rational decision-making, analysis, self-awareness. And another way to say this is Daniel Kahneman's work, which is like Nobel Prize winning work about system 1 and system 2. So your system 1 thought process is incredibly quick. It's your intuition. If you're a healthcare practitioner, you're using system 1 so often because it's been trained over time to diagnose quickly. And in many cases, our intuition, it's very helpful. And yet it is wrong very often. System 2 is intended to help mitigate the inaccuracies of system 1 by applying executive function. But if we don't engage system 2 on purpose, it's very hard for our initial biases to be overrun. So then how can you actually get better at inviting new insights to emerge, at challenging old, pre-existing, very habitual behaviors and thought processes, many of which are running under our conscious awareness? And I want to offer you this idea of a teeter-totter, because the heavy part of the teeter-totter is your default mode. We are most often just running in this automatic get things done mode. To break it, you actually have to engage your experiential processing. So this book, which is new and is excellent and written by people that have come up in the mindfulness world, their invitation is, as soon as you start paying attention to your senses, so what you can taste, smell, physically feel in your body. Can you feel your bum sitting in your chair? Can you feel your feet touching the floor? Can you inhale and exhale and know what breath cycle you're on? When we pay attention to our senses, we actually inhibit part of the go, go, go automatic portion of our brain. And it's very helpful if we actually need to break unconscious patterns that exist. The last thing I'll say about this is, in order to start leveling the teeter-totter so that we're not always in default mode, the magical lever is to engage what we call a prosocial network instead of a defensive network, which is part of the default mode. And to do that, you practice gratitude. The more often you can practice gratitude, you are more consciously capable of switching into this sensory process, which allows you to access insights and relate to the world around you in a really different way. With that invitation, I would love to invite you actually to do this. So Eminem and I would love for you to actually please stand up. Please stand up. And if you feel more comfortable, go ahead and turn your cameras off. And can you start just by standing taller onto your tippy toes? And as you come down, breathe slowly so that by the time your heels touch the ground, your exhale is also out of your body. We're going to do that again. So this time as you inhale, take the arms up high above your head, look up, stretch up, reach up. And as you exhale, bring your hands down slowly so that by the time the palms are at your hips, the breath is out of your body. One more time. So inhale, stretch up, reach up, fill up. And this time as you exhale, we're going to wiggle, waggle back and forth and shake out of your body. And then go ahead and sit down. And I'm going to ask that you look at something in the room that you haven't paid any attention to yet today, but that you've been like sitting beside all day. Or maybe it's been in your office for years, but you haven't actually looked at it in a really long time. And just take that in and engage that part of your sensory mode that allows you to relate to something in a different way. And to close this practice, call to mind something wonderful that you've done that impacted somebody else. Maybe it's how you dealt with a client. Maybe it's how you supported a colleague or a friend or a family member. But give yourself a moment to actually cultivate as much as you can this appreciation for yourself. And if you were able to feel that or touch that or access it, that's your pro-social network. If you were able to feel that warm fuzzy for a moment in your body, that's how that practice works. And if you weren't able to, that's okay, but that's a great sign that you need more time with that lever to help your teeter-totter start to shift. Alrighty. We're going to tackle two sections in our time together. Part one is exploring your own biases and learning to become more aware and accepting of them. And then part two is how we want to actually start to practice addressing the microaggressions that we might experience.
Affinity bias is the tendency for us to favor certain tasks. So if you are someone who maybe has the same smoothie every morning or chooses the same lunch at the cafe every day, you probably have an affinity bias towards that. It allows us to favor certain people and situations just because we're more familiar with them. And these things happen all day long, multiple times a day. But the problem is there are bigger implications, and it can impact us and our view of the world without us even knowing about it. So who we build relationships with, who we ignore, who we provide services for, how we treat certain people when we need to provide services for them. So this next activity is meant for us to see how these biases affect our work. I'm going to ask you to grab a pen and a piece of paper, or if you're working on your computer, you can also just type it out on your computer. And I'm going to ask you to please write down 5 people who you would consider to be your most trusted friends, your most trusted people. They are the people you share your secrets with, you confide in, you get advice from. It would be helpful if some of them were from work and some from outside, but they cannot be your family. They can be your chosen partner, but they can't be your mom or your siblings. So 5 people who are really your trusted 5. Okay. Now I'm going to name some categories for you. And if you and your trusted person are the same, you're going to put a check mark. And if it's different from you and your trusted person, you'll put an X. So let's go for your first trusted person, the top person at the top of your list. Are you the same age? If you're the same age, put a check mark. Are you the same disability level? Check mark or an X. Are you undergoing gender reassignment, or did they? Check mark or X. What about marriage, civil partnership? Are you married? Are they married? Are they living with someone? Pregnancy and maternity. Are they pregnant? Are you pregnant? Do they have kids? Do you have kids? Race. Are you both of the same race? Are you both of the same religion? Are you both of the same sex or different sex? And are you both of the same sexual orientation? So beside that person, your trusted person, if my trusted person was Ellen, I would have a series of check marks or X's. And now I'm going to go through my trusted list of 5. And I invite you to do the same. Go through your list of 5 and quickly check off or give an X for each person, for each one of these categories. I'm going to give you 3 minutes, maybe even less. Once you're done, I encourage you to have a look. The trusted 5 are the 5 people that you would go to for advice. They are the 5 people you would maybe tell about a great deal on a car or a job opening that you might know of. Friends and family are on the outside, and acquaintances are the third ring. And that's probably your most diverse group, is the acquaintances. But look at your trusted 5 and the check marks and X's. Are there lots of check marks or are there lots of X's? Because oftentimes your trusted 5 will have lots of check marks, meaning that the people that you surround yourself with, the people that you are getting advice from, the experiences that you are living with them and through them, they're very similar to you in your life. And does it mean that you're bad if there's tons of check marks? No, I think probably many, many times you're going to have more check marks than X's. Does it mean that you need to now leave your office building and start chasing people who look different than you and say, you need to be one of my trusted 5? Hard no, that would be weird. And it would get you into an awkward situation. But what it should do, and this activity isn't to make you feel bad that you've surrounded yourself by these people, but it's just for you to be aware of the fact that you might be living in a world that is very different from other people. And these inbuilt biases are going to change the way and the lens that you look at other people. And it's to help us understand that our life circumstances have led us to having social circles that probably look a lot like people like us. Or if you're like me and Ellen, people who don't look like us, but maybe all of our trusted 5 have check marks that match each other, except for maybe race. That's what happened in my trusted 5. Race was different, but everything else was a check mark. You are not bad. If you have lots of check marks, it just means that chances are there's a group of people you know very little about. And when you meet someone, you need to recognize that when you're speaking with someone in a workplace environment, that person is an individual, and that you have to start with the idea that you probably have very little information about them, and the info that you do have might be based on stereotypes and assumptions from media, and that you need to actually actively take time to understand where that person is coming and their perspective. Ellen is now showing you this wheel of power and privilege. This one is the one that causes a lot of uncomfortable feelings, and that's okay. It's meant to cause uncomfortable feelings. This is the wheel of power and privilege. On the outside of that circle are, the closer you are to the outer edge, the more likely you are to be excluded, forgotten, ignored, The closer you are to the center of that circle, the more likely you are to be heard, prioritized, be offered opportunities. This wheel of power always makes people feel uncomfortable because it makes you examine where you are, where you wish you could be, and also sometimes it makes you feel like it's unfair of where you are. But instead of thinking of power and privilege as corrupt people making shady deals, managers and bosses working together, what about the idea of how we could harness that power and privilege to create change? What if there was a different way that we could use this power and privilege? So I just want you to take 30 seconds to look at that wheel. Oops. And see, how does it shape how we see ourselves, and how does it shape how we see each other? Because the first time I saw that wheel, I realized there were so many things I never even thought about. I was just living that part of the pie, and I hadn't even named it or addressed it, which meant that it was privilege because I didn't even have to think about it. So if you wanted to write down any initial comments or responses that you feel looking at that wheel into the chat, please do. There are 12 slices, and each slice is cut into 3 parts, which means just this wheel alone, there's many other wheels now. There's 36 dimensions of identity, and you are not just one thing. I mean, there's a lot of talk of intersectionality. So like, how many different forms of intersectionality can you capture just as yourself? The problem is that when you are in a position of power, if you're a manager, a boss, you are consciously and unconsciously treating people in a certain way. And you might start to make rules and decisions that you might not otherwise have made, but you are because of where you are located on this wheel of power. And if you're part of the marginalized community, you might be afraid to speak up because the system is set up so that nothing is equitable for you. And why would you want to speak up when people might just minimize your experience? I'm going to ask you to fill in your own wheel. So I think on the handouts, you guys have this as a handout. And oh yeah, someone said I would add nepotism, corruption. There are many other wheels, and it's got even more slices of this pie because people keep adding different dimensions to this power and privilege wheel. And you can be marginalized and still have power. It doesn't mean one or the other. And you can feel very uncomfortable looking at this wheel because for the first time, you might realize that you have more power than you thought, or you don't think that you should be so close to the center of that wheel, and you're seeing other realities for other people. So on that homework sheet, I'd like you to fill in your own wheel and just plot where you fall on this wheel of power. And notice where you fall and what represents your identity. And where are you most marginalized, and where do you hold the most power? I think Ellen's going to make a breakout room. And if you wanted to, in that breakout room, you're invited to share how you feel about this wheel. You're invited to share, what makes you uncomfortable about the wheel. And you don't have to say anything either. But the person whose birthday is coming up next is invited to start the chat. There was only one person in Ruth's breakout room.
I am going to make larger breakout rooms so that if that happens, and if that happens, then feel free to pop back out and just join us in the main room and we shall discuss together.
Why don't I stay in the main room too, Ellen, and then.
So come on in and join your room.
Joining a room.
Yeah.
Hi, Ruth.
Hi.
Hello.
I wonder why. Maybe it's because of my participant status.
We said allocate everyone, but it's possible. In any case, what was that wheel of privilege like for you?
I am half in the very center and half on the middle outer one. Does that make sense to you?
Mm,
You know what I mean? Like half in the power, like close to the power, and my other half of the characteristics were kind of on the outer, not the outermost, but the middle circle. Yeah,
mm.
yeah. I knew, I knew that.
You knew that.
Mm.
And what is that like for you? Have you done this exercise before?
I guess not. I guess informally, maybe. Um, my work really makes it very obvious that I am privileged. So it's reminded to me very often. Yeah.
Mm. What's that like for you to be reminded of privilege? I hear something in your voice as you say that.
Yeah, I've talked to my counselor many times about this. There's a element of guilt and feeling like non-deserving.
Mm. Mm.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. Ritu, it's nice to see you. I don't know what's going on with the breakouts, but I'm happy to hear you here.
That's
What
okay,
was
thanks.
the wheel of privilege like for you?
First of all, thank you for pronouncing my name properly. I'm
Yeah,
always
my
very
pleasure.
happy. Not that I don't mind too much when people say Ritu or Ritu in French, but it is a South Asian name, and there are a lot of South Asian people in BC. I don't think it's so difficult to say Ritu, and I just find it so refreshing when someone, when people from call centers call, and it's often someone with a Indian accent, I actually tell them, "Oh, thanks, you said my name correctly." And
So
there's
seen.
looks like there's a Neetu in the room as well. So, love your name.
Imagine if she was like, actually, it's me too.
You'd be like, that's right. I should wait to hear from you how you want to be addressed and identified. I really appreciate the wheel. I think about intersectionality a lot. I thought about when you said that you could be in a marginalized position and still hold power.
Mhm.
I identify as a person of color, and I try to do, I'm a social worker. I try to do anti-oppression, anti-racist social work, feminist social work. So I live and breathe this, issues that we're talking about. And unfortunately, I see a lot of backlash against marginalized people and marginalized issues in the school and workplace, and generally in everyday life. I find it a bit frustrating when people say, "Oh, we're in Canada, we don't have those problems." That's what came to mind for me.
It is, the lived experience is so painful, and then to constantly have to defend it is just its own experience. Thank you so much for that. The truth of the matter is, to jam this topic into a 1-hour webinar is almost comical, and I don't even care, because we feel so honored to get to even facilitate this kind of discussion, and it's just so important we have it as often as possible. If that exercise made you uncomfortable, then wonderful, we're doing the work. And there's just a million different experiences and shades of life in these wheels and beyond the wheels. A big takeaway that we're trying to, I guess, hammer over your head is just part of the work is starting to really own and take more accountability for our own biases. The power of self-awareness here is enormous. There are a group of researchers that have put forward something called the SEEDS model of bias. And SEEDS stands for similarity, experience, distance, and safety. And in academia, there's over 150, well over 150 different biases that we study, but these guys, they condensed and thematically organized them to come up with these 5 main categories. And I've included a slide on this in the references, so you can look at this later. But step 1 that they suggest is just start to accept what's happening for you. And if you can't see it yourself, then ask your partner, because they will tell you all the things. Like, you just call your sibling up and they'll tell you what's up for real. The better we can actually label it, the better we can disable it. And then in order to mitigate habitual behavior, just think of me and Eminem every time, so that you remember, I have to engage this sensory experience. I have to self-regulate and override my automatic tendencies. And in order to do that well, which is an incredibly like a high self-regulatory task, you have to be nourished. You can't be exhausted to do this work well. So you have to sleep, you have to eat well, you have to discharge. And by that, I mean like literally scream in your car driving home. I mean, maybe we're not all commuting enough, but there is something to be said about the actual physiological release of the experience. I also want to leave you with this image. Shadow work is when we start to lean in and pay more attention to the parts of ourselves that we don't like and understand them better. So if you have like an ocean of resentment somewhere that's living around, or parts of yourself that you're so embarrassed or you feel like you really have to hide, this is all part of shadow work. What we haven't yet explored is like this bowl of icing that you keep jamming into an icing bag. And then something tiny is going to happen to you. And depending on how much is in your icing bag, there's so much pressure getting squirted out of this tiny little thing, which is why a triggering moment can have a very explosive overreaction, because we haven't yet done our work in our own shadows. And if we want to really start healing what is like generationally incredibly painful experiences, then we need to individuate. We need to start understanding why things upset us, where that comes from. Is that mine, or is that the past generation? There's a lot to be said here. We're dangerously close to the end of time here, but I wanted to at least give you some frameworks for how we can start pushing back on the realities of incivility and microaggressions, which like are like microaggressions, because really they're not micro, are they? Incivility was a term coined by a group of academics in 2001 to talk about what we now kind of understand as microaggressions or non-microaggressions. But it's all the things that you're like, was that rude? And was that because I'm Asian? Or what just happened there? But it's the ambiguity of low intensity slights that leave you feeling out of place. And this is, I think, my new favorite word. So monacopsis, the subtle but persistent feeling of being out of place. And if you experienced yourself somewhere on those marginalized edges of the wheel of power, this probably feels like you're being seen. Because there are many instances that we are, in fact, wondering whether we belong. And it can be very subtle, but still very loud at the same time. In the chat, I'd love for you to put in anything that resonates for you. So have you ever experienced monacopsis? Have you ever experienced a microaggression? What happened? And please feel free to put that in the chat so that we can see and experience how common these experiences truly are. While you're doing that, I'd like to share this with you. So the next time someone says or does something that doesn't feel right to you, instead of just stewing about it later or piling it down and suppressing that anger, you could in fact address it. And obviously addressing these topics is highly sensitive, depends a lot on the context, a lot on power, a lot on repercussions. But if it were possible to address it, what might that actually look like? I've included also in the references more information with nonviolent communication so that you could explore it. There's also really great TED Talks that are like 14 minutes long that teach you how to use this method, but it's very effective because it takes out the judgment and the tendency to land in a place of blame and defensiveness. The experience I want to gift your nervous system right now is this sentence. So whether or not you're able to speak out loud, I don't know exactly where you're situated right now, wherever you're dialing in from, but if you're able to say this out loud, give it a go. So I'll model it here because I have the privilege of the mic, but I deserve to speak up and be listened to. I deserve to speak up and be listened to. Yuri, would you do me a favor and could you read that sentence?
I deserve to speak up and be listened to.
And what does it feel like for you to say that?
It feels good to speak up all the time. I speak up all the time, but imagining all of these people saying this out loud is like emotional for me. Because I bet lots of people don't say that.
Is there anyone in this Zoom room now that might be willing to unmute their mic and read this and say it for us, with us?
I can give that a shot. I deserve to speak up and be listened to.
And what does it feel like for you to say that sentence out loud?
It's surprising how it hits me on the work I was doing just before I came here, trying to create proposals and working really hard to earn the right to be listened to by saying enough things and getting enough rationales and getting enough evidence. I realized that I was trying to earn that right to speak up. And it was hard work.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So folks, if you're still here and you're listening, I'm going to talk to the part of you that is a lot younger than the version of yourself that's currently here in the Zoom room. Somewhere along the line, you said something and people didn't listen. And you really needed to be heard. And I'm sorry they didn't listen. And now, as your adult self that's here in body, your work is to remember that you do in fact deserve to speak up and to be listened to, not because you had to earn it in any way, but because you're human.